Hello friends, good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm in Barcelona, Spain, and this video is just a little reminder for those of you following A Course in Miracles, and for you to know that A Course in Miracles really goes beyond a merely psychological understanding or simply self-knowledge. No, it goes much further than that. It's a transformation of thought. It's there where you will choose which thought system you want to govern you, whether it's the ego system or the system of the spirit, the system of your inner being. So it's a deep understanding of who we are, where we come from, how to act, and how to improve. I invite you to follow these lessons. We're going to have 3 or 4 more lessons so that you can really start with that personal change. This is my book, A Course in Miracles, where you can't even see the letters on the cover anymore. A big hug to you all.
Hello, how are you? This is Dr. William Gallego speaking. Well, in this year 2025, we have a new project, a WhatsApp chat called the School of Life, to answer any questions you may have about mental health, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, obsessive compulsive disorders, addictions, codependency, phobias, behavior, whatever you want. And I myself will answer you with an audio message about any question you have. Since there are many people reaching out to us, just contact this Life Ecology WhatsApp number. Give us your phone number, we'll add you to the WhatsApp chat, and there you can ask any questions you want, and I myself will answer whatever you need. Many blessings, I await you.
I'm in commune number 5, specifically in the San Mateo neighborhood, with a good friend named Marianela Beltran, who leads the Acres Foundation, which does wonderful work for people with cognitive disabilities.
Welcome, Danny. Thank you for coming to visit us. Acres is special care, training, and rehabilitation. Born in November 2003, we are almost 21 years old. We work with people with cognitive conditions such as autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, mild to moderate and profound intellectual disability, and all related conditions.
What services do you offer?
We offer speech therapy, occupational therapy, special education, psychology, neuropsychology, and nursing. Oh, and physical therapy.
And how many users do you have?
Currently, we have 17 users ranging from 2 to 50 years old. We have a professional team who are like angels because they are donating their time. We have the psychologist Nancy Rueda, whom I would also like you to meet in a moment. We have the speech therapist Leidy, the occupational therapist Paola, and the nurse and physical therapist Keith.
This is the invitation I extend to everyone who will watch this video. Join us, look for the foundation, check out the Angeles de la Guardia project, and let's see how we can sustain and promote these kinds of initiatives that do so much good for our city.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to this program. We're going to have a great, wonderful program about it's important for you to understand psychological abuse, the psychological and psychiatric harm caused by child abuse. I remember when I did my dissertation, I chose 1,000 people in the system, 1,000 inmates, and 1,000 children who had been abused by their own parents due to negligence, and I gathered some very, terrible statistics, right? 84% of the children who had been abused ended up in prison, ended up with severe depression, developed addictions, and even ended up committing suicide. So this leads to countless social problems, mental health issues, and all kinds of physical problems. Well, we have a specialist here from the Acres Foundation. As you already know, I support this foundation because they are doing wonderful work. Just imagine working with children who have autism, brain issues, cognitive problems is truly wonderful work. And these psychologists donate their time, they volunteer their time. Specifically, Leidy Johanna is a specialist in psychology, but also in child abuse. And we're going to talk with her so that you can understand the consequences and maybe, think twice before yelling at or hitting children. So here she is, psychologist Leidy Johanna Huérfano. Hello, how are you?
Hello, good evening to everyone. Nice to meet you.
Thank you for being here, for accepting the invitation. So tell me how you got into the world of therapy and psychology, and especially working with children who have been sexually, physically, and psychologically abused by their own parents and also by the system.
Well, Yes, since always I've had the goal of being able to serve the community as such. I started out volunteering with children, and I realized the whole process that these children who have been abused go through not just sexual abuse, but also physical and emotional abuse, and the consequences that each of these experiences brings for them. So for me, honestly, it's incredibly rewarding to be able to actively participate right now with the ACAS Foundation, volunteering my valuable time, as you mentioned, and generously donating my efforts, but with the profound purpose of providing meaningful motivation and an additional much needed resource, both emotionally and spiritually, to each and every one of these deserving children.
In what ways have you worked with children who have been abused sexually, psychologically, and physically? And what are the consequences you've seen in these children from those feelings of abandonment, separation, neglect, devaluation, and degradation? I imagine most of them have very unhealthy self-esteem. What has your experience been like working with these children who have been abused?
Well, my experience so far, as I mentioned earlier, has been truly rewarding for me, not just professionally, but personally as well. Because many times we tend to individualize the entire and complete process that each and every one of them personally goes through. Well, I think that from the psychology side, I have provided small forms of support, not only to the children, but also to their families, because many times we can see that the abused child lives with a number of other people around them, not just their mother and father. So this support is extremely important, both for them and for those, let's call them for now, the guardians who strengthen the support that the children need, because in fact, one of the main causes or consequences is the antisocial behaviors that they display after experiencing this kind of abuse. Also, depression and anxiety, all these intricate processes involve a truly countless number of diverse therapies, which are not only essential support therapies, but also engaging activities that genuinely help them to perceive life in a profoundly different and more positive way.
Notice that the vast majority of studies that have been done with psychopaths, with people who have antisocial or narcissistic personalities, well, the vast majority of them have been abused, including, for example, the one who, no, I shouldn't mention names, but the one who killed so many people in the Jews, he also suffered a lot of abuse from his parents. So we see similar characteristics in people who have those criminal thoughts, who lack empathy, who lack compassion, who harm animals, and most of them have been abused. Another statistic that struck me was that more than 90% of sexual abuse happens within the same family, not outside. And that's terrible to hear that parents, uncles, cousins abused at some point or damaged child's sexuality. And on top of that, all the trauma they felt. And also, as you might remember before, what worked was the belt therapy or sleeper therapy, and physical abuse was considered acceptable. I remember a teacher I had, and it stuck with me because what she did was so embarrassing, and at that time it was considered acceptable. I mean, the parents would sign so that they could hit you, but this teacher, I was about 5 years old, she brought me to the front, and I still remember it. I was wearing little shorts, and she pulled my pants down and started hitting me with a ruler in front of everyone. Imagine the embarrassment. I didn't know whether to cry or what, and that's what these teachers, sick people, did, right? I mean, because there are a lot of people, sick people, who also abuse children, and teachers who also abuse them in all kinds of ways. So the question is also, and what is the in the incest cases that you have managed to hear about? Have you had the opportunity to work with pedophiles, for example?
Well, not directly with pedophiles, but I have seen cases in some types of investigations. I have seen cases involving all these processes. And I say that, well, more than judging, because many times we or the vast majority of society simply say, well, he was caught, or this person committed such and such a crime, in this case, everything related to sexual abuse, but we don't get to see the depth of that person's situation. I mean, yes, at this moment he's committing the abuse, he committed the abuse, he did countless things, but maybe we're not acknowledging what's behind that person's story. And I feel that when there is a healthy childhood, a childhood with love, with open communication, all of this contributes to that person becoming a responsible adult in the future.
Of course.
Everyone has just several mistakes, you could call them, but all those mistakes can be addressed as we empathize through good communication and good treatment.
Yes, and another statistic that has come out is that the vast majority of those who sexually abuse children were also abused themselves. So who helps the bully? Who helps the abuser? If behind them there's also a history of abuse, so that's an important part, and also to protect children from their relatives, it's important from their cousins. It's very common. Oh, they stayed over with their cousin, and if they for some reason have been sexually abused, they will end up, libido will be awakened, and they will feel the urge to touch others as well, even their own
Yes, sir.
relatives, without caring about anything, and that happens very often. For example, I imagine that in Colombia, in many households, hitting is still allowed, right? The belt and all that, because they don't know any other way physical abuse and also psychological abuse, like belittling them, saying, you're good for nothing, you do everything wrong, using bad language and all that. And all of that is a very deep form of abuse that creates feelings of lack of love, of unhealthy self-esteem. And for that reason, they can't even manage to go to school or finish their studies. I mean, there are so many things involved when a person feels devalued, degraded, right? So psychological abuse and physical abuse. Have you had cases where you have, for example, seen children who have been burned or beaten and who have been taken away by the system because of alcoholism, drug addiction, since they also remove them for that? The TIO here is called the Child Protective Services. I don't know what it's called over there.
Well, yes, I have had these cases. Unfortunately, I have to say that more or less, well, in a study that was conducted around 2022 here in Colombia, it was found that more than 58% of boys and girls were being abused. Regarding the topic, yes, I have seen children here. The Family Welfare Institute, that's what it's called in Colombia, is the institution that protects all boys and girls who have been abused. As I said before, it's not just physical abuse, but also sexual and emotional. And yes, I have seen how the processes are carried out with the parents who have committed these kinds of crimes against children. These are very painful processes because these are children who are, I don't know how to put it, so sensitive to the situation they're experiencing that many times they don't even speak up. It's only when perhaps a teacher at school notices, or another family member or neighbors from the house where they live, that reports are made. So with these children, you have to start from scratch completely because they come to you emotionally damaged. I mean, they're already afraid that any random person might approach them to talk or have a conversation. These are children who begin to develop significantly antisocial behaviors, who can no longer go through any process of adaptation or adjustment to their environment. So we start working closely with these young children on the emotional and affective side of their development to help them gradually gain a bit more emotional stability and inner peace. And this significantly helps them begin to truly progress in each of their individual processes.
Let me ask you, in the psychology that's taught in Colombia, because here in the United States, it's a bit different. Here, for example, psychologists have to get a doctorate. After the master's degree, it's 5 more years. Here, those who are psychologists are doctors. Not in Colombia. In Colombia, just a master's degree is enough to be a psychologist. Here, they're doctors. Here, you need 5 more years of education. but also what are the interventions they teach you to heal trauma. I'm telling you this because I didn't even learn it at the doctoral level. The only thing I learned was that eye desensitization, therapeutic sensitization, approved by Shapiro. But that's why I became interested in neuroscience and hypnosis and all those schools that go to the root, because if we don't go to the origin, and that's why I want to ask you this. When a personan, these are studies we've done when a child, for example, at the age of 5, is sexually abused or witnesses their father hitting their mother or is beating themselves, there is a part of their being that remains trapped in that memory with those emotions. So we realized that memory is plastic and that it was important, with our eyes closed, to enter the subconscious, reactivate those painful memories in order to do a sort of rescue. And since emotions are energy, to remove that emotional association so we can modify the memory. Those techniques are not yet available to them. They are, I think that here, for example, most psychology is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very superficial for working with trauma. What other techniques do psychologists there learn or are taught to work with trauma, severe traumas, for example?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if it's fortunately or unfortunately, but here in Colombia, we kind of have some gaps in the direct aspects of what we're taught. That's on a general level, you know, because yes, what you are indeed saying, doctor, is that these particular things are very, very basic in their fundamental nature. Indeed, in some places I've seen that to become a psychologist, you have to be a doctor. That's it. Here, we're just licensed because it's something basic. So what happens? Well, for me personally, since I was so interested in this part of psychology, I started researching more on my own. I mean, I didn't just stick with what the university or the professor or whoever said, but rather try to supplement a lot of different aspects. So I've tried to bring all of this together in a coherent way to make it easier to carry out all the processes I'm involved in. Regarding what you were asking me about, well, what you were saying about the additional processes, I've had the chance to read some of your previous videos, and I really do feel it's very necessary to go deep inside the mind, into the subconscious, and to connect all these aspects in order to identify some of the issues that human beings have as such. Not just sitting down and saying, well, look, this works like this, or do this therapy, or do that exercise, but rather trying to go a bit further and being able to see what is leading that person to their current behavior.
Of course, the origin, right? The cause. So that's why psychoanalysis, to me, psychoanalysis is very important, analyzing the person's entire personality. I mean, what happened when you were a child? What was your upbringing like? How was your relationship with your father, with your mother? The whole history of people who abused them sexually, physically, emotionally, if they were bullied at school. All of this is very important because it all has to do with people who have hurt you. Also checking your self-esteem, though you love yourself. Do you have a good dialogue with yourself? And that's important. And now what I've seen in traditional, because I'm not very traditional anymore, honestly, I use very little of what I learned at university. I developed my own methods that are more effective because I've tried everything. In fact, I was a university professor at the master's level at a school, at a university, Walden University, which has 60,000 students. So, and I taught all the techniques, but they weren't effective. That's why the frustration of having to learn others came from not knowing how to heal traumas and from wanting to create a method that was more effective. And I found that there were alternative psychological schools that were not approved by the American Psychological Association, but that were very effective, like clinical hypnosis, deep relaxation to access the subconscious, like neuro-linguistic programming to use the senses and anchor information, like Gestalt therapy, which uses well a technique where an empty chair is used so you can bring in the people who hurt you and express your suffering. Like spirituality itself, which no one uses anywhere because they don't teach spirituality or faith or meditation at universities. But I believe it's very important. Faith in a higher power, however, each person conceives it is a very important factor for forgiveness, because in the end, resentment is what causes cancer, hatred is what causes all these illnesses. So the inability to forgive, well, it's not going to lead you to healing all these wounds, the wounds of the soul, right? Which are wounds of the psyche, of the mind. So actually, in Barranquilla, in Colombia, I met a family that owns about 7 universities, and we're preparing to maybe offer them a course, special neuroscience courses, which are specialties in trauma, so they can learn, because in traditional psychology, they teach a little bit of everything, but there isn't a specialization, and trauma should have its own specialization. Just like those who have addiction problems, well, if the person doesn't know, that also has its own specialization. So life ecology, the neuroscience part is like a specialization in trauma. With this method, I have eliminated post-traumatic stress, phobias, panic attacks, severe depression, and obsessive compulsive disorders. That's why I want to take it to a global level. And in fact, we are certifying people worldwide. I also commit to training you so that you can work more with trauma, because we really need to reach the subconscious. The problem I see, and correct me if I'm wrong, ladies, that when we ask a lot of questions about childhood, for example, to an adult or a teenager, like what happened when they were a child, we end up opening wounds because we go back to those memories. And then what do we do to close that wound? If the person had already forgotten about it because it was so traumatic and pushed it into the unconscious, and now with the questions you asked me, I remember that my uncle touched me, or that. So now, how do you close those wounds? There's no way to close them. So the person is left open. So how do you handle those traumatic processes?
Well, unfortunately, at this moment, I can say that when we go through this process, yes, obviously we touch on more sensitive areas of our patient or our child, well, countless times. And right now, at this very moment, we genuinely don't possess a definitive technique that can truly say, with this particular and precise technique, you can effectively evolve to completely close that deep-seated memory or that profound emotional wound that we've just recently opened. I found it very interesting. I repeat the process, the project that you are leading, because I feel that this process, as I said, goes beyond simply being a psychologist sitting at a desk and doing a consultation with my patient. So it's like trying to evolve again in that process and have all those techniques that are so important, because one of the things that I feel is fundamental is the affection that is given, I feel, from the moment the baby is in the mother's womb. I feel that this is very important, and for many people that's not something so essential, because the first thing they say is, well, the baby can hear, the baby can feel. And no, I don't think that's the case, because that's true. I mean, it's a living being and it feels.
Perinatal psychology says that all the emotions the mother is feeling, the baby feels them too.
The baby feels them.
Another part of my work is that when I do regressions to the womb, the person feels, and I take them back to the womb and they feel something from a certain month of gestation. So I used to have epileptic seizures when I was born, because my mother, I was the last one, right? There were already 2 of my siblings. There was a lot of scarcity. My father was an alcoholic, so there wasn't enough to feed 2. And my mom, even though she was using birth control, got pregnant. So it wasn't good news. It was traumatic news, because now what am I going to do to feed a 3rd child? So my father in his alcoholism was very negligent, and my mother cried a lot during the pregnancy, and I ended up having seizures from so much fear and sadness. So all of that gets passed down genetically.
Yes.
Now, there's another aspect that also hasn't been explored much in traditional psychology, and that's regressions to past lives. Now, people don't understand that this has nothing to do with religion, that it has been scientifically proven that reincarnation does exist through scientific evidence. We have hundreds and thousands of people who have been able to remember exactly what happened in another life. Now, if you, let's suppose that in another existence, you were full of depression, full of resentment, full of hatred. Since emotions are energy and your existence ended with all those emotions, it's very likely that in your new incarnation, you bring all of that story with you, right? All those emotions. That's why sometimes children are born already with genetic problems and everything. So what I do in therapy is that I take them to other lives and remove the emotions there. This is something that no one else does worldwide, because I studied some techniques with Brian Weiss, the psychiatrist who developed this type of regression therapy, the originator, but he doesn't do it this way. So I said, well, if it's possible to modify memories in this life, then it's possible to modify memories in another, because in reality, there is no time or space. So closing the wound means removing the emotions from the trauma, you see, so that it ends up being, if memory has plasticity, you can modify the memory, not the recollection. They're two different things. So let me give you a case. When I was 7 years old, someone who had grown up with us was killed right next to me. So every time I was left with that trauma, because I would have nightmares and all that, since the killer was right in front of me and shot him right in front of me. So I was left with those images. So the same thing I teach now, I did as a patient myself. I said, let's do this hypnosis, let's reactivate this memory, relieve and measure these emotions. And then I saw for myself how my memory changed, because I could remember it and it no longer hurt. So I also forgave. I did a forgiveness is wonderful for forgiving, for letting go of those people who hurt you. So that's my work now, to teach everyone, and for people to have enough humility to realize that just because you're a psychologist doesn't mean you're a trauma specialist, that you have specific tools for healing trauma. But unfortunately, sometimes just because we have a degree, we say, no, I already know. Honestly, if I see that there's someone who is deeply traumatized by sexual abuse, who has witnessed a loved one dying right next to them, or